All right. Welcome, everybody, again. I'm Dr. Jeff Katzman. I'm Director of Education here at Silver Hill Hospital, and we are so delighted to have you join us today, where we are really privileged to welcome two fantastic speakers, Dr. Maria Muzik and Dr. Katherine Rosenblum, who will co-present on the topic From Zero to Thrive, the Science and Practice of Nurturing Early Relationships. And I have the pleasure of introducing them in just a moment. First, some housekeeping. As we move into April, our next Grand Rounds will take place on the 12th, hosted by our colleague here, Dr. Emily Haas, who will talk to us on what's called More Than Ungrounded, the assessment and treatment of dissociative disorders. We hope you can join us, and you can find this and all our Grand Rounds on our hospital website under calendar. You can also register here for upcoming Grand Rounds. Back to today's lecture. We welcome you to put forward your own questions and thoughts to Dr. Muzik and Dr. Rosenblum. As usual, at the end of the lecture, I will moderate a Q&A discussion and hope you will take advantage of this opportunity. You can submit a question anytime during the lecture by using the Q&A box, either with your name or, if you prefer, you can submit it anonymously. If you wish to receive continuing education credits, please kindly complete the evaluation survey that will show in the browser when the webinar ends. We'll also email a copy of the evaluation to you after the webinar concludes. And finally, disclosures. No planners of this activity have indicated a relevant financial relationship with an ACCME-defined ineligible company whose primary business is producing, marketing, selling, reselling, or distributing healthcare products used by or on patients. And with that, it is now my great pleasure and honor to introduce our guest speakers today, Dr. Maria Muzik and Dr. Kate Rosenblum. And I want to say first, it is really such an honor to bring Drs. Muzik and Rosenblum to Silver Hill Grand Rounds today, if only virtually. I first met Dr. Muzik when she gave Grand Rounds some years ago at the University of New Mexico, where she really inspired a number of faculty to learn more about attachment. And that actually led to the development of an entire clinical program of focusing on the years of 0 to 5 in the psychiatry department there. Really, I've always thought of that. It's amazing what one talk can do sometimes to inspire really the development of a program or even a career. Some years later, I had the great joy of training in a program called the Fraternity of Fathers, or Dad Power, with both Dr. Muzik and Dr. Rosenblum. And I got to see them both there, and it was truly a gift to learn about the thoughtful curriculum that they had there in Michigan, and in which the idea of attachment was really brought together with outdoor education. And it was so creative and so great to see you both there. And now on to some introductions, starting with Dr. Maria Muzik, who is an associate professor of psychiatry and OBGYN at Michigan Medicine. Her work focuses on the impact of stress, trauma, and mental illness in the context of childbearing on caregiving and the developing parent-child relationship, and how to support families in overcoming psychological and environmental adversity. She serves as principal or co-investigator on multiple projects funded by the National Institute of Health, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid in Michigan. She holds a doctorate in medicine and master's degree in public health, and serves as the medical director of the perinatal psychiatry program at Michigan Medicine, in charge of perinatal clinical care delivery, both within psychiatry as well as integrated within obstetrics, family medicine, and pediatrics. Additionally, she's the medical director for MC3 Perinatal, a statewide perinatal access program to primary care, public health nursing, community mental health, and other health providers. She's the co-director of 0 to Thrive, a multidisciplinary initiative at the University of Michigan focused on promoting science, increasing public awareness, and developing and implementing programs and services to buffer risks and enhance resilience in young children under the age of 5. Within the scope of this work, she's co-developed the Strong Roots curricula, a series of interventions for parents and other caregivers to foster caregivers' reflective capacities and enhance their sensitive caregiving, and ultimately to benefit the wellness and health of young children. In 2018, she's co-edited the book Motherhood in the Face of Trauma: Pathways Toward Healing and Growth. Dr. Muzik is highly published with over 140 articles in peer-reviewed journals. That was Dr. Muzik. Now, Dr. Katherine Rosenblum is a clinical and developmental psychologist and holds dual appointments as a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and OBGYN. In the Department of Psychiatry, she co-directs the Women and Infants Mental Health Program, the Infant and Early Childhood Clinic, and Zero to Thrive, a program focused on promoting the health and resilience of families with young children. Dr. Rosenblum's expertise in infancy and early childhood, parent-infant relationships, and parent mental health is broad. For example, in collaboration with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, she's the lead evaluator of a multi-site statewide evaluation of infant mental health home visiting services, encompassing a number of studies, including several community-based quasi-experimental pre-post trials, as well as a university-based randomized controlled trial. Her expertise in parenting, maternal mental health, and infant parent interventions is nationally recognized. She's the current president of the board of the international organization, the Alliance for the Advancement of Infant Mental Health, and she's an Academy Fellow with the national organization 0 to 3. She's published also over 150 peer-reviewed articles and chapters, and has been funded by NIH as a PI or co-I continuously for more than 15 years. These funded studies and manuscripts include several randomized control trials, including an NIMH-funded effortful control intervention to reduce preschool anxiety, as well as a series of studies testing the efficacy of a mental health and parenting intervention she co-developed with colleagues to serve pregnant women and/or parents of infants and young children. Her research, supported by both federal and foundation grants, emphasizes early relational health and prevention and intervention for families with infants and young children facing adversity. Many of the families she works with have experienced significant disruptions, including separations, trauma, and/or loss. In these contexts, her work focuses on strengthening protective factors to enhance family resilience. And with that, it is a complete honor to welcome you both to Silver Hill's virtual Grand Rounds. Thanks so much for accepting the invitation, and I will pass the baton to you. I'll see you in a bit when you're done, and we'll have some questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Katzman. That was a mouthful. I have to say, that was kind of you to share all of that. We are really honored to be here and to be able to share some of our work with you all. And as Dr. Katzman noted, we're going to be focusing on the science and practice of nurturing early relationships. And what we understand from our conversations is that many of you will be focused primarily on working with adults. Some will work with youth. Some are working with parents who have kids. I like to think of adults as just grown-up young kids. So we all have a history of being young. I hope whatever hat you wear, you'll find things that are valuable to you in thinking about the importance of the work that you are doing, the importance of relationships, and possible applications. As said, we don't have any disclosures for this presentation. We have funding from a number of different federal foundation sources. And so that's for our research. And we're grateful to them for that. Oh, for some reason, okay. As was noted, we co-direct a program called 0 to Thrive at the University of Michigan, which is a program that focuses on promoting the health and resilience of families through early childhood with research, education, partnership, and service. And I think you'll hear some of that as we are talking. We'll be sort of weaving the work as we go. A couple of main points that I hope you will take away from this presentation. The first is that early relationships are foundational. So whether you're working with little kids or whether you're working with grown-up little kids, those early relationships served a really critical role. And we'll share sort of some biopsychosocial evidence to support that. The interventions to promote early relational health can help to buffer the effects of toxic stress. So often we can't change the circumstances of families' lives, but we can work to really build up protective factors to promote positive outcomes, and in particular, early relationships. one thing that we'll really highlight throughout is our understanding of parenting reflectivity as a key mechanism in promoting intergenerational health and well-being. And we know that there's some strong foundations in reflective function work and understanding at Silver Hills. So for some of you, this will just reiterate some of what you know, perhaps in a new light. Relationships are also deeply culturally embedded. And so we really want to think together about programs that can nurture reflectivity and also support parents' own insights, privileging their values and their voice in the work that we do. So hopefully you'll hear that. And then we want to illustrate with 3 kinds of programs that aim to support and enhance parenting reflectivity and early relationships across settings. So we'll talk about video review in primary care. We'll talk about our strong roots groups, with which Dr. Katzman made some reference to, with fraternity of fathers and mom power. And then we're going to talk just briefly about our evaluation of infant mental health home-based psychotherapy. Less because we think you're all going to run out and do this, but more because I think we're learning some really important things about the incredible impact of relationship-focused interventions on intergenerational health and well-being. And then finally, we want to consider these tools and strategies as you might use them in your own work. So just to sort of make that point a little bit more clear, we're going to talk about the work in the programs that we do, but we hope you will take this as an illustration, knowing that there are a lot of different paths that one can take. And that while we're sort of talking about our strong roots programs or infant mental health home visiting, other programs are likely to have similar impacts and similar effects. And so we offer this as one way of understanding the power of early relationships. Before we continue, I'm actually going to do a little experiential thing because that's part of what we do. And I'm going to ask you all to just get comfortable wherever it is that you are in your seats, whatever office. Just take a moment if you feel like it, sort of get comfortable in your chair. You might want to close your eyes, take in a deep breath. And what I'd like you to do is just take a moment to think about a tree that's special to you. This might be a tree from your childhood. It could be a tree near your home, one you remember, or perhaps it's one you see every day. So I'm going to give you just a moment to get comfortable and to take a moment to picture your tree. So now what I'd like you to do, hopefully you've had a moment to sort of think of a tree that's special in some way. I want you to just think about words that might reflect how thinking about and mentally being with your tree made you feel. So how does it feel to sort of be in that space with the tree that you're imagining? So if we were in a smaller group, I would ask you to share those words and create a word cloud with all of you. But what I will do instead is share with you an example of a word cloud. The larger words are the words that came up more often when we asked people that same question. And these are some of the things that they associated with. And I will say that these are themes that we've heard many times as we do this exercise. And it's important because you'll see that the theme of trees and strong roots weave through our work. But the words are things like relaxed, nostalgic. A lot of people think about childhood trees. It helps them to feel comfortable. And peaceful. We know from neuroscience research that being in nature is restorative, even at a sort of brain-based level. It might also have some hard feelings and be evocative. So there's a word distant there, or perhaps cold. And so there's no one image that will be sort of reassuring or warm. It may evoke feelings of loss or loneliness for some. But by and large, we find that sort of trees evoke these sort of strong foundational feelings of connection and comfort and peace. And what we'd like to suggest is that just like the roots of a tree, early relationships are foundational. We know we're going to talk about the science behind this, But this is a quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, and she's a Native American woman and also an ecologist. She says, in the Western tradition, there's a recognized hierarchy of beings with, of course, the human being on the top, the pinnacle of evolution, the darling of creation, and plants at the bottom. But in Native ways of knowing, human people are often referred to as the younger brothers of creation. We say that humans have the least experience with how to live, and thus the most to learn. We must look to our teachers among other species for guidance. Having a little delay. Okay, so I'm going to move forward with just thinking a little bit about early relational health and how we understand early responsive relationships. Early relational health is the capacity to sort of be in a relationship that is responsive and nurturing and helps to promote the individual's well-being. And as we think about early relational health, we have to really understand that relationships are, as I said earlier, deeply culturally embedded. So our understanding arises from listening to families, communities, cultural stories that tell of resilience and strength. We are grounded in an understanding of human dignity and opposition to systemic racism and acknowledge the overload of economic oppression, racism, and colonialism. So early relational health is not a specific program nor a specific intervention, but rather an all-in approach that partners with communities and with programs. We understand that early relationships matter not only in one generation, but across generations. And I'll just share with you that this is my daughter reading a book that my parents used to read to me when I was young. And so I think of this as my slide to share intergenerational development of a developmental psychologist. But what we also understand about sort of intergenerational transmission is that it can also be the case that early experiences and intergenerational experiences of adversity have impact. And so most of us are, I'm sure, familiar with the ACEs studies, which really help us to understand that early experiences of adversity are predictive of a whole slew of negative outcomes later in life, including social outcomes, but also physical health outcomes, mental health outcomes. I'm not going to sort of repeat ACEs because I think people are really familiar with the ACEs studies. What we'd like to do is make sure that we're thinking also not only about sort of early adversity and its impact on later development, but really sort of taking ourselves to task to think about what are the sort of root causes? How can we move upstream in our understanding of ACEs? So the ACEs here on this tree are up at the top. These are things like experiencing parental divorce early in childhood, or someone in the family with substance abuse or domestic violence. But what we know is that adverse environments can contribute to those kinds of ACE experiences. So having inadequate access to housing, lack of safety and community, economic oppression, discrimination, those sorts of things. So these are root causes, but the roots go even deeper. So a colleague friend of ours, Chandra Gashipan, has written pretty extensively about what she refers to as the atrocious cultural experiences, or the original ACEs. And these are things like genocide, slavery, colonization, forced family separations. We can think about boarding schools that were used to really eliminate Native culture and experience and to interrupt generations' experiences, removal of property or land, or denial of human rights. And these kinds of original ACEs give rise to systemic oppression and inequities that we see now, like police violence, mass incarceration, that preschool to prison pipeline, or inequities, disparities in the child welfare system. And those in turn can give rise to adverse childhood experiences. And families that we are working with have lived through many pandemics. So we have COVID-19, we have a mental health pandemic, we have a racism pandemic. So there's a lot of stressors. What I will say, just the first paragraph of this quote from one of our sort of guiding lights, Alicia Lieberman, who is the developer of child-parent psychotherapy, writes, "The pervasiveness of trauma is partly a social failure. It's the social failure to provide a decent standard of living, sustainable employment, safe housing, safe policing, safe neighborhoods, so that there's a continuum from a lack of social justice to personal trauma. That's what we just talked about. And to think of trauma informed only at the personal level is really blaming the victim. So I'm going to stop reading this here, but I just want us to hold that in mind, because this is very much true to the work that Maria and I do, that we really work with families and with individuals who have trauma histories, but we have to understand trauma in context. And we feel that that's really a critical point for us all. We want to, therefore, as we're sort of thinking about trees, we're thinking early relationships are foundational, but we have to attend to the soil so that we can nurture those roots. And we have to be, all of us, social workers, advocates, champions for safe housing, education, social support, employment, access to healthcare, racial equity, and so much more. What is inspiring to Maria and I, and hopefully to many of you, is that in the work that we do, while we recognize these inequities and disparities, we also know that there are reasons for hope. So I'm going to give you a couple of reasons for hope based on work that has been done in our lab and others. You do not need to worry about sort of reading all the numbers here right now. This is a paper that was published in Development in Psychopathology by a colleague of ours, Cecilia Martinez Tortea. And what she was looking at, basically, she was sort of interested in how early experiences, ACEs, like childhood abuse experiences, might impact parenting, which in turn could impact infant adaptation during stress tasks. And so she was looking at a still face, it's called. And so she was looking at behavior, but also the baby's biology and coping with the stress. And what I want you to sort of take away from this is that even in the face of adversity, prior experience is not destiny. This is some of the good news. So what you see here is that there are lines that connect these things. So in fact, parenting is related to how infants adapt during stress. And in fact, depression is related to parenting, but there's no direct line between experiences of early abuse and parenting, or experiences of early abuse in infant adaptation. What we see is that it goes through depression. And this is important because we know we can help support parents with depression, right? We can address the mental health needs and we can address the parenting needs. And so that early experience of abuse, while it has an impact, it's not direct, and there is hope, right? There is hope because we can make a difference in those areas. The second point is that early relational experiences are protective, and that positive experiences are important. So it's not just negative experiences that matter, but we understand now from a whole host of work that's being done that positive childhood experiences and relational health earlier in life predict positive outcomes later in life. And in fact, those early positive experiences are even more important and more impactful, one could argue, if they happen in the context of a life where a person is experiencing many ACEs. So early positive experiences, not just early negative experiences, really do matter. And then the third point that I want to share with you, and this is a big relief for those of us who are parents, I'll put myself into this camp, which is that we understand now that good enough is truly good enough. I sort of chuckled when I saw write up in Science News about a paper that Jude Cassidy and her colleagues had published, where they basically looked at how people provide secure base to their kids responding to their distress cues. And what they find is that, it's not that you respond perfectly immediately every time, but that there's sort of a predictable response most of the time, but not all of the time. And so they sort of summarize, good enough parenting is really good enough, study finds. Thank goodness, right? If we only have to get it right 50% of the time, that feels a little bit more aspirational, perhaps, than holding us to a standard of perfection. But even good enough can be harder when children have experienced trauma, stress, or adversity. So I'm going to share this little thought bubble, which I think many parents would wish would sort of sit above the heads of their child or their youth, or even above our own heads for other people, that would tell people, when I'm feeling overwhelmed or stressed, I can't hear you, I can't think clearly. I can't respond to you. And I need your help to calm me and to help me feel safe. It would be so much easier to know that that sort of overwhelmed or stressed behavior was because of those things. But people don't come with thought bubbles that are sort of easy for us to read above their head. And so because of that, we really are relying on our capacity to sort of try and understand what people might be thinking and feeling and how that underlies their behavior. And we call this the role of reflective parenting. So what is reflective parenting? It's an appreciation that mental states underlie children's and actually all of our behavior. And these mental states can include things like feelings, thoughts, beliefs, desires. It leads us to understand, therefore, that behavior has meaning. Kids aren't just doing things to us, but that there's a reason that they're doing these things. And that it helps us to be able to respond to them more effectively if we can take perspective and understand what it is that they might be thinking, feeling, or experiencing internally. This is deeply informed by and connected to the extensive work on parental insightfulness and reflective functioning by Fonagy and Oppenheim and Slade and others. In our own work, we measure this typically using the parenting reflectivity scale for the working model of the child interview, and we've published on that. Why do we, however, sort of focus on reflective parenting? Well, if we sort of think about life without reflective functioning, if you have a child or a patient or a partner, someone in your life who is behaving in a certain way that might be causing some feelings in you, without reflective functioning, what we tend to do is just react. So we see the behavior, we react to the behavior. With reflective functioning, what we can do is essentially hit a pause button and sort of ask ourselves, what does this behavior mean? What might this person be thinking or feeling? And how do we want to respond in a way to those thoughts, those feelings, those experiences? So it helps shift us from reaction to response. And this is really, really important. And you'll see how we sort of nurture this in the work that we do with parents in a moment. We know from lots of research that reflective parenting is a protective buffer associated with more attachment security, more responsive parenting, and better mental health outcomes across the lifespan. And importantly, we also know that reflective parenting is modifiable. That is, it can be nurtured and it can be supported. In one study that we did, this was also with Cecilia Martinez-Dordea and Maria and David Oppenheim and others, we looked at a sample of mothers who had experienced child abuse in their early childhood. And what we found was that mothers who had greater insightfulness about their child and sort of a greater capacity for reflection and for insightfulness, which is really analogous to reflective functioning, that they experienced actually more responsive parenting, even as stressful life events in the postpartum increased. So if you had sort of high reflective functioning, you were less reactive to stressful life events in your parenting. And so this is really important. So what's the implication? The implication is that we want to nurture insightfulness and reflective parenting with families. And we understand that trauma can impact sort of safety and relational trust in engaging and help-seeking behavior that might allow us to sort of help support those functions. When we have trauma, the sort of predominant cognitive impact across many studies and populations, from military veterans to women who have experienced childhood abuse, is a violation of trust and relational trust in particular, a worldview that the world is not safe, and then a self-efficacy sort of corollary that I'm not able to sort of protect myself, or I can't protect my child. And if you operate from a I'm not safe, the world isn't safe, and I'm not able to be effective, this can lead to emotional dysregulation and psychological isolation. And that in turn leads to changes in behaviors like less help-seeking mental health problems or less responsive caregiving. This is something I think all of us see. And what I hope you'll sort of appreciate is now, as we switch to a summary of some of the programs that we've developed, is that we're sort of thinking about that and thinking about how can we therefore develop programs that meet families where they are engage and nurture, build that relational trust and a sense of efficacy through a trauma-informed lens, enhance parents' own self-efficacy through empowerment, reduce isolation, because isolation is a key predictor of many sort of negative outcomes. We weren't meant to sort of navigate life on our own, and certainly not parenthood and early parenthood. We want to focus on building skills around self-care, problem solving, and emotion regulation, and ultimately increase reflective parenting and mental health. So 3 examples that we're going to zoom through, and I'm going to do the first one and then turn it over to Maria, who will share the second 2. And they vary in duration and setting. So if you only have 30 minutes, you might be interested in one of the interventions that we're doing called the Early Relational Health Clinic, or Thrive with Your Baby Clinic, where we use relational health screening and video review. And then we'll talk about Mom Power and the Strong Roots programs and the home visiting work. So I'm going to just very briefly describe our brief context, which is advancing relational health in pediatrics. So one of the things that we really think is important is we sort of engage with our colleagues who meet families where they are, because there is really no one who is more sort of a consistent, regular touch point for families than the obstetrician and the pediatrician. And so what we really want to do is help providers to think about relational health as a vital sign, so that checking in on relational health is just as important as checking on developmental health and physical health indicators. We developed a clinic called the Thrive with Your Baby Clinic, where we basically invite parents to make a movie of themselves and their baby, and to meet with an infant specialist so that they can play together, watch together, and learn together. We do this in the context of primary care. We also do this in some of the outreach programs that Maria leads statewide, telehealth consultation, where we provide service to families, and in our perinatal clinic. And this is a universal health promotion and prevention strategy that involves briefly observing parent-infant interaction, using a screener to sort of identify strengths in areas where parents want to grow, and watching the video with the family. It's very brief. We have limited toys, and we really encourage face-to-face interaction. And we've demonstrated in publications that our ratings on the tool that we use that can be rated in the moment are reliable with ratings of others later who watch the videotape. But more importantly than all of that, and this is really my sort of truth, the most important thing about this is that video review can be used to support early relational health conversations, and that these conversations are really important because what they do is give an opportunity for parents to watch, to observe, to have their own insights, to help us understand what it is that they are thinking, feeling, and seeing, and to sort of work together to sort of identify and reinforce strengths and areas where they wish to have sort of change. So I'm going to let you hear from one parent about their experience with video review.
I think it's a positive encouragement. It's really encouraging to see where I started from in this how I would have described it as this really dark place, this really empty, lonely place where I didn't know the next thing that was going to happen. Was it going to break me, or was it what was going to happen next? So over the course of our conversations and the course of our time together, I can feel my changes, but then to see it on camera and to actually see that I feel like my face is brighter and I look happier and I look softer. I know that that's what him and my other child are seeing, and that's really important to me.
So a point that I want to make here is that oftentimes when we're doing this in different settings, we're doing it with parents' own phones. So, it's like, let's make a movie together, and they can take the video and watch it and then take it home with them. And they can sort of hear our voice in conversation with them at later times. So this can be done in a very simple way. But what's really important is how we engage in that conversation and how we engage in the observing. So we really emphasize the provider stance as being benevolent, looking for sort of strengths, curious, collaborative, and humble. Parents are the experts on their children, and we want to understand what they're thinking and feeling and seeing. We want to encourage and support parent observation and insight, not to judge, but to share in observations and reflections. We want to build on their strengths and help parents to discover and own their own knowledge. We offer information and guidance, but with careful intention, not to out-parent the parent, but to be collaborative and to expand sort of parents' own curiosity. And we engage in this with cultural humility, as I've talked about. This is a chance for us to understand sort of where the parent is understanding. So how do we do this? We also sort of ask questions. It's not scripted, but we ask things like, what did you notice? How typical was it? What was your child thinking or feeling? What was the sweetest moment for you? Is there anything you want to try doing differently or to do more? Things you enjoyed seeing yourself do or your child? Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes parents say to us things where we sort of think, I'm not sure that's exactly what your child is doing. Like, let's say if they say, oh, I think he's spoiled and he's trying to manipulate me there. Well, when we have those moments, we see these as opportunities to broaden the frame. So we first always delight in and welcome parents' observations. I really appreciate your sharing that with me. But we can also expand or reframe by asking things like, I also wondered if, or do you think that maybe he might have, had something that he wanted you to know? Sometimes I've heard that other parents see their children do that and they have noticed. So it invites parents to sort of consider another possibility, but then we're sort of interested in how they're responding to it and letting them again, own the knowledge and the expertise, and we're partnering and joining in that journey. And this is important because what we're aiming for isn't a right answer about how to do things. What we're aiming for here is enhancing and supporting and nurturing parents' own reflective capacity. And we do this because we believe that it really does go a long way towards supporting early relationships. Lots of interventions tell us that using video review is powerful. These are some of the interventions that use video that have evidence behind them. And meta-analyses have been done that tell us that actually the use of video makes an independent contribution to the efficacy of other interventions. So it's powerful. And we have found that in our own work as well, I should say. So one more parent talking about this. This is in the context of primary care. Well, here we go.
You never especially me, I never see myself doing a video with him and looking at myself, what we could do together. And I actually got inspired by that, to be honest. I want to do more videos with him to see what he's doing and what we could do after. We could look back and, oh yes, we did this way, and we could do something else. So even inspired me to do more, actually. Because we just did this little thing. I'm like, okay, we could continue pushing to do even more greater stuff with him.
And so these are the kinds of things that we actually typically hear from parents when we approach the video in the way that we do. Parents find it to be a really reinforcing, powerful experience, and one where they're not judged, but partnered with in meaningful ways in understanding their own experience as parents and their children. All right. So with that, I am going to turn over now to Maria Muzik, who will talk with us about our multifamily group work.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Well, as Kate outlined, the goal is here to enhance reflective capacity and to support parents, caregivers. That could be, the bio parents, foster parents, that could be grandparents, that could be adults, attachment figures who are in the child's life, in their reflective capacity. And we developed this kind of group of programs, all called Strong Roots programs. And I will loop back why we use nature metaphors that we highlighted in the beginning. Kate, next slide. So it's Mom Power is the program for moms. Fraternity of Fathers, you already heard it, is the program for fathers alone. Mom Power for moms alone, and then the strong parenting families would be for the family as a whole. Next slide. So what is the basis for all these Strong Roots programs? What are the core components? We're really try to enhance protective factors. We're building on the protective factor framework that is well established in the literature, framework that has been demonstrated and researched to promote family resilience in the face of challenging circumstances. And these protective factors framework is to enhance parental resilience, social emotional competence enhancement, to enhance knowledge of parenting and child development, to support parents in their social support, and to provide also concrete assistance in times of need. These are the 5 protective factors. So now the core components of Strong Roots programs are tapping into these same 5 components in this way, that we are providing an attachment-based parenting psychoeducational group that's to enhance the knowledge of parenting and child development. We are providing through the group context and through additional supports, enhance the social supports. We are connecting to additional services, that's to provide concrete assistance in time of need. The groups all have a practice component, a coaching practice component of direct parent-child interactions. So this is to enhance social emotional competence, and then to promote self-care and attention to own wellness and mental health needs. This is to enhance resilience. Next slide. The theoretical foundation for all these Strong Roots programs that we started to develop, now 10 plus years ago, is really based on 2 aspects. One, from as we highlighted in the beginning and kind of walked you through this experiential activity, is we do believe that nature metaphors are really alluding to some fundamental truth and are connecting emotionally, are evocative. And so we use nature metaphors, and specifically a tree metaphor, to talk about some of these complex aspects like attachment theory. In terms of the theoretical foundational components or roots for Strong Roots programs, besides attachment theory, we adhere to trauma-informed care theory. So the aspects that Kate described in the model, that we are well aware that it changes worldview and self-perception. We are very adherent to cultural responsiveness and the aspects that Kate discussed in terms of tending to the soil of cultural and environmental experiences. All the Strong Roots programs are relationship focused and therefore adhere in some way to the infant mental health principles and infant parent psychotherapy principles. And then we use also evidence-based tools and therapy modalities like cognitive behavioral therapy tools and dialectical behavioral therapy tools, interpersonal therapy tools, motivational interviewing skills, because we know that these are valid and valuable tools that are used in the service of this overarching program. Next slide. So in terms of, as an example, Mom Power, this was the flagship of all the Strong Roots programs, the initial to be developed for moms only. The outset of all these group programs is always the same. It's a 10-week group engagement and 3 individual sessions. Individual sessions at the beginning and at the, like as an intake individual session, and then an exit session at the end of the programming, the 10 weeks, and then at least 1 midway individual session. In between the groups, we have check-in phone calls weekly to check in on well-being, as well as the need for some resourcing. Next slide. When we think about any programming, we know that programs are only as good as they are accessible and responsive to the larger context of needs and stressors. And so often individuals are not able to engage in interventions in whatever form because of either external or internal barriers. External barriers could be lack of childcare, lack of resources like transportation, or if it's virtual, lack of the ability to have Wi-Fi and a laptop. And internal barriers would be, as we discussed, the history of own traumatization, and maybe now a changed worldview that led to shaming, fear of stigmatization, fear of engaging, and mental health concerns, mistrust. So with all that, all the Strong Roots programs are trying to address all these barriers. And so, Kate, if you just kind of fast forward, we are trying to help on each level, and this is just kind of a demonstration that of the aspect that Kate was alluding to in the beginning. Therapy needs to be multi-component. It needs to address the internal psychological barriers, the historical barriers, as well as the current contextual resource barriers that would interfere with engagement. Next slide. The format of these groups that are approximately 2.5 to 3 hours. So this is a very intense engagement. Is that we start with the parents. Again, this could be moms in the mom power, or in the dads group, the dads with their children, or the whole family. It could be multi-family, it could be parents, it could be parent and grandparent, whoever are the caregiving individuals in this child's life. They come together and we start with a shared meal. This is to create group cohesion, to create a nurturing environment. And around the kitchen table, we break bread together, and we create this aspect of connection. And during these meal topics, we already broach some aspects in a lighter way to talk about social supports, peer supports. There is always a weekly topic. And the kids are at the table, but often also maybe already running around and engaging with the child team members that then afterwards, once they separate, attending to them. So during the shared meal, everybody's together, the facilitators as well as the parents. So then comes a very intentional separation. The parents or caregivers go to one room, and the children go with the child team members into the child group. So there is two groups, here in this case, Mom Power, the mom group, where now content is delivered. This is this attachment-based psychoed group and self-care teaching, but also a lot of just discussing, reflecting, sharing, and so engaging with the material in a very engaging way. While the children with the child team are in a child-led play environment where they are supported in their free play. And we staff these child teams with, child psychologists, but then also with trainees who can learn about child development. After this kind of class engagement, there is a reunion. So this is now a supported reunion. After they separated in a supported, intentional way, now they reunite, and that is observed. That this is a way to now observe in vivo, almost like a strange situation paradigm, right? Where the kids were separated from the caregivers and now come back together to see how they re-engage. And this can be a mode for observation, awareness building, helping the parent to notice the child's behavior and response to the separation and reunion, and then reflecting with the parents from week to week, how can we support that your child separates and reunites, maybe in a more safe way from you. After this reunion episode, there's then time spent together in a circle time with kind of an easy, fun way to end this group with songs and play, and then there's the goodbyes. This is the format how we developed this program in person delivery. Of course, with COVID and the change of the ability to be in person, we also developed a virtual format of these groups. And so some aspects like separation reunion does not happen because the parents are at their home with the child, maybe there in the room on Zoom. But we still are bringing in separation and reunion stories and use that as a mode for reflection about these aspects, or we use naturalistic moments on the screen to discuss these topics. So we could talk about that later in more detail, but we made adaptations keeping the modality or the spirit of what we are trying to do here, even in the virtual application. Next slide. So many programs and interventions draw on attachment concepts, and that's what Kate was showing with the one slide where she showed you the many pathways that lead to relational health, relational support, early childhood interventions. It's all attachment concepts speaks about the balance, like John Bowlby highlighted, the balance of any person, child, adult, youth, or adult, to balance attachment and exploration needs, and that there are individual differences, right? And that we are as persons able to explore and thrive and grow and learn new things, and that we are driven to do so. But in order to do so, we need to feel safe. And we need to be grounded and rooted in safety. And these are like the roots. So we use the tree as a natural metaphor, as a nature metaphor to talk about attachment. Next slide. And this is the early foundation for positive developmental outcomes. So as you can see, John Bowlby talked about secure base and safe havens. John Bowlby talked about the parent or the caregiver's role is on the exploration mode side of a child, where a child wants to learn and thrive and grow. The parent is serving like a secure base from where to explore. And what does the parent need to do to support that? The parent needs to be there to help and attend, and if needed, to step in, and also to enjoy and delight in the child's exploration needs. At the same time, a child might feel vulnerable, scared, get hurt emotionally or physically. And in that moment, switches from exploration mode to a connection need or attachment need. And that's where the parent is promoting a safe haven. And that's where the parent is going to need to nurture, to restore the child's emotional safety and repair potentially a disruption. So we use the tree as this metaphor to talk about attachment. And next slide. This is how we introduce it to the parents in the group setting by using this little video from where to go. And we want to share this video with you.
The tree represents ways that children learn, grow, and thrive. When a child feels safe and secure, she feels ready to explore, play, learn, and try new things. Yet even during these times of branching out, a child still needs a secure base, that is her parent or caregiver, to enjoy with her, to help her, and to keep her safe. There are other times when a child feels unsure, scared, hurt, or distressed. At these times, we say he has a need for connection. When parents or caregivers offer a safe haven for their child's feelings, they are meeting their child's need for connection and are nurturing and strengthening his roots. Children develop through the balance of exploration and connection, branching out, and building deeper roots. Parents and caregivers support this growth by providing a secure base and a safe haven for children to explore and connect. Children's inner core strength is built up, ring by ring, through daily experiences of having their needs met by their parents or caregivers when they branch out and build roots. This process begins in earliest infancy when parents hold, nurture, and comfort their child, and continues across childhood and adolescence. Notice that there is a balance between the reach of the branches and the depth of the roots. If the tree's roots are not as wide and thick as the branches, the tree is more vulnerable when strong winds blow. In order to be more resilient, children, just like the tree, need roots that are deep and strong that can help it weather the storm. The sun reminds us that both the branches and the roots need warmth and joy to grow and thrive. When parents or caregivers meet and welcome their children's needs with a sense of delight and acceptance, they provide the sun and warmth that helps their children not just to grow, but to thrive. Just imagine, if every child and family had strong roots, what a beautiful forest our community would be.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. Well, with that, so why are we using a tree? Well, we think nature metaphors are powerful. Tree imagery is evocative. It kind of guides us to allude to the emotional aspects of parenting and own childhood experiences. But trees are also a nice metaphor because trees are flexible, they are resilient, they grow strong, they can survive in harsh climates. So when we think about the roots systems, like being grounded in the earth, when trauma, when strong winds and storms are impacting us, it guides us what we need to do to survive the harsh climate. We need to ground ourselves. And yet then when we recover, we can again thrive and branch out and grow. Trees can also be transplanted. And so that speaks to the fact that, sometimes we have to disconnect from one ground and reconnect somewhere else. So that kind of leads to children in different kin care or foster care situations. We can kind of use this metaphor to talk about that. But then in order to replant somewhere else, we need more nurturance and care to strengthen the roots. So in many aspects, the tree metaphor is a very useful to think about all these complex aspects in a very non-psychological or a jargony way, and just kind of use this nature metaphor. Families like it. So we, in our work, we then have, family activities where the children are then asked, draw your favorite tree. And you can see here a little guy who speaks about, I like eating the apples of it. I can draw it really good. Talks about his tree and grows all on the roots, all the family in his life. And then next slide, the dad also speaks about of this kiddo who also has evocative thoughts and feelings about trees, talks about the Michigan white pine, and talks about, you know, perfect for bow hunting, and is green all the year. And this was a military man who was deployed and then came back and reconnects with Michigan and his environment. Next slide. So we also talked about that it's beyond just, you know, the branches and the roots. It's really tending to the soil, because there could be toxins in the soil, and you know, all the adversities that are contextual, historical, and ongoing, like oppression, racism, colonialism, underfunding of school, violence, brutality, police shooting, all of that are toxin in the soil. And we need to, as clinicians, to attend to those and join the forces to work against. But in addition, we also as clinicians can specifically help protect and strengthen the caregivers' protective factors to be able to cope and manage. So that next slide. So in addition to, we work on working against the toxin, but also to strengthen the protective buffers as clinicians, to strengthen relationships, families, and the communities. In addition, we also can enhance the nutrients in the soil by doing all the work that is tending to health equity and anti-racist work, to social justice work, and connecting to our own cultural roots and communities and working with the communities. Next slide. We think that the tree metaphor and kind of building roots and sprouting hope through this tree metaphor is very powerful. And this is one quote of one of our participants in the Mom Power group, who basically says, I didn't have roots growing up in foster care, and now I see how important connection is, and I want to build roots with my baby. Next slide. So how do we support now using this visual metaphor in the day-to-day of the group? So one is, here we are using basically a CBT concept, where we are saying, you know, to every response underlying every behavior is a feeling, and we need to attend to this. And instead of immediately being reactive, we want to set this pause button. We want to intersect reflective capacity. So helping the parent to attend to what are actually the needs of this child or this person in this moment, and only then go back to the response and working. So to walk you through this wondering and response wheel is, if you have a person or your child with a difficult behavior, or any behavior that is unclear or confusing, to really ask yourself, so what is my kiddo doing in this moment? Is this a branching out moment? Is my child exploring, or is this a building roots or connection moment? And what might the underlying feeling be? So enhancing here some perspective taking in this moment, not being immediately reactive, building on that feeling to think, okay, given that this is either a branching out or a building roots moment, what is the need that my child has? Based on the tree metaphor, do I need to attend and help? Or is it important this is a moment of nurturance, restoration, and repair? And build based on this, crafting my response. And as you can see, it's not a one and done. It could be that the response does not yield and undoes the behavior, that there is still maybe some sadness or crying or acting out happening. So continuing this, it's till and trying it out again. It's not a one and done. It's until the behavior fits the response. Next slide. We already discussed this, so these are the core components. that are highlighted in all these strong roots groups. Next slide. And now thinking about research. So we have done now research in different contexts. We have done open trials. We have done a community-based. We have done a RCT. But the bottom line is that this intervention has, high levels of satisfaction and engagement and retention with the parents and participants, around 70%. We found that we are reducing depression, trauma-related anxiety, and also connection to community resources in those who underwent the intervention. Next slide. Very importantly to what we are talking here, we found that in the RCT, that those who underwent the Mom Power group, as opposed to the controls, improved in their parental reflective capacity. Next slide. We found in an adaptation of this strong roots groups for military families. So it was the Strong Military Family project. We found that those who underwent the intervention improved in their parenting, responsive parenting, with more positive affect and more emotional responsiveness towards their children. And these were children from infants to young age, like elementary school. And that this effect was through enhancing reflective capacity. So again, the mediator of the effect of improving parents' responsive caregiving was going through enhancing their reflective capacity. Next slide. We also have some exciting imaging data. We ran so the parents who either underwent Mom Power group or the control group in the RCT also underwent imaging pre and post. And what we found is, next slide, we published this what we found is, and you see the right panel from pre to post, that brain regions, in this case it was the amygdala, amygdala is related to fear response, but also to emotional valence. And this was in response to in the scanner, moms were shown pictures of their child or a stranger child, an infant, with different emotional valences, from neutral to scared to sad to joyous. And what we saw and what the research shows, that particularly parents who have trauma and are depressed are not responsive, kind of in their emotional valence, to joyful visual displays of their children. So they are not joining in the joy, seeing their child smile. And what you see here is that with the intervention, the moms who were in the Mom Power group, they're firing, they're in this brain region in response to joyful expression of the baby in the scanner was enhanced, whereas the one in the control group was actually was reduced. And the most important is that this increase in joyfulness responded to, was inversely correlated with parenting stress. So the more joyous, the more they responded in the scanner with this brain region activation, the less parenting stress they reported after the group, which might speak to the fact, if I can join more positively with my child, I feel less distressed by the child's behavior. Next slide. Well, the implication I just said, so next slide. Developing other programs based on in the strong roots concept, we always work with the communities to listen to their needs and then tailor to the community needs and to the voices from the community. So with that, we created now a menu. Next slide. And you can see we have Mom Power. This is for the moms. We have now a Spanish language adaptation. This is for mothers. We have the Fraternity of Fathers that you heard about for fathers of young children. We have Strong Beginnings as a variant for parents, caregivers, and professionals in the child welfare system. We have now a peer-to-peer modality of these groups where parents are trained to lead then discussion circles as parent cafes, again based on these strong root concepts, but with less content and more ability to just a free discussion and reflection. We have the military, the Strong Military Families group that we talked about, and I showed you the data. And then for parents who might have more complex psychiatric presentations, some self-injurious behavior, some suicidality, and maybe more complex psychiatric conditions, we developed a combination of DBT, group-based DBT, with strong roots concepts, and we call it the perinatal DBT, strong roots DBT. Next slide. This is the Spanish-speaking group. Next slide. And now I know we are kind of running against time. So Kate, do you want to take it away for 2 minutes on the infant mental health?
Sure. Hi, thanks, Maria. I hope as people were listening to that there was also an opportunity to sort of think about your own reflections on your tree and how it made you feel and how this is connecting, because that has definitely been true to our experience. I'm going to talk just super quickly about infant mental health home visiting, which is a model that was developed by Selma Freiberg, originally in Michigan and then in California, and then was basically in Michigan, carried forward to be embedded within our public health system from the 70s and 80s onward, and persists to this day as the predominant model for CMH service to families with young kids from pregnancy through early childhood. And the person who was responsible for that was this powerhouse woman, Betty Tableman, who just passed away about a year ago, and was very involved in this evaluation study work. So we always like to acknowledge her. And there is a manual for this that is available for purchase also through the Alliance for the Advancement of Infant Mental Health, of which I am the past president, not the current president, as was said in the beginning. But if you want to learn more, you can go to the Alliance for the Advancement of Infant Mental Health to learn more about this work. I will just say that we've done this evaluation in Michigan with the collaboration of many individuals and many organizations listed here who we meet with regularly, and we're very lucky and fortuitous that we have so many people who are really passionate and committed to infant mental health in Michigan and surrounding areas. And so we're beginning to see the fruits of the labors of the last several years of evaluating this program, both in the field as it's deployed by community mental health service providers, but also in an RCT that we've implemented at U of M. Our first series of publications came out in 2020, I believe this was. And since then, we've published quite a number of other papers, which I'm going to briefly tell you a little bit about. Basically, though, just so that you all sort of share an appreciation of what infant mental health home visiting is, it's a multifaceted needs-driven intervention delivered by infant mental health specialists. It was foundational to the subsequent development of child-parent psychotherapy, which many of you are probably familiar with. And as I said, it's funded throughout Michigan. Just going to quickly tell you a little bit about two approaches: our community-based effectiveness studies and then a randomized controlled trial, and highlight some of the outcomes for you. So the first outcome that I want to share with you is that we did find that infant mental health home visiting, which uses a psychodynamic sort of core of infant parent psychotherapy, was in fact associated with increases in sensitive caregiving, and that there was a dose response relationship. And this is as delivered by community mental health workers in the field with families who are experiencing very high levels of stress. So there was, I think, almost half of the sample had incomes of $15,000 or less. And a very high percentage of the families had PTSD, not just early ACEs, but actually symptomatology. Importantly, we found that this effect was amplified when the providers reported using video review at least once every quarter. So it didn't have to happen often, but there was an independent effect in increasing sensitive caregiving. We also found that in that community implementation, there was a reduction in child abuse potential using a standard inventory for child abuse potential, and an increase in more responsive, accepting behavior as rated by someone who went into the home and observed parents and kids interacting in the home. So this is good, more intervention. In contrast to the Thrive with Your Baby Early Relational Health Clinic, which was 30 minutes, or the 13 weeks of Mom Power, the infant mental health home visiting can last for years, but these studies reflect up to a year worth of service. So this is a more intensive needs-based service. All right, so positive findings there. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. But before we do that, we also learned through these studies about workforce sort of needs. And many of us across the nation are dealing with workforce retention. And we like to sort of share with you that we think that it's critically important to apply the tree to parents and young kids, but also to ourselves. And so you see here our tree now. I can't do this without holding my hands up to sort of share with you sort of how we are holding and supporting people in our practice, whether it's children or parents, communities. And in order to do that, we also have to nourish our roots. So thinking about how is it that we are nourishing our mind, spirit, heart, and body is critical to our capacity to nurture and hold those who we're striving to help. And sure enough, in our work on infant mental health home visiting, we found that nourishing those things were really critical for reducing burnout and increasing job satisfaction. And one way to really nourish and hold those roots is through the provision of reflective supervision. And so we found that feelings of reflective supervision, self-efficacy, that you're sort of able to use this in meaningful ways, reduced burnout and increased job satisfaction among community mental health service providers. We also did some work looking at race, ethnicity of the providers. And just very briefly, I will say that we found that in fact, the race, ethnicity, so it's not just what we do, but who we are matters. And that, in fact, what we found is that therapeutic alliance ratings were higher when rated by Black clinicians about all of their families on their caseload, versus for white clinicians, we saw discrepancies. White clinicians reported higher therapeutic alliance 3 months into treatment with their white families than they did with Black families. And this is really important because we know therapeutic alliance early in treatment predicts retention. So this could be sort of a factor underlying equity and speaks to the fact that we both need to increase diversity of our workforce, but also attend to bias or factors that may complicate forming therapeutic alliance. And we've done that work and we're publishing sort of how we've incorporated that into training. All right, last thing that I'm going to share with you about sort of findings, because we've shared a lot, is, this sort of suggestion that we made at the very beginning that, we can modify parent reflectivity, we can modify sort of relationships, we can nurture and support relationships through all these mechanisms. But does that matter intergenerationally? Can we actually mitigate the impact of early experiences of trauma and adversity that parents have on child outcomes? And so I'm going to share with you just 2 findings. This one is in submission by our colleague Jessica Riggs, who basically found the receipt of infant mental health home visiting services and sort of the degree, the level of receipt of those services mitigated the impact of mother's PTSD symptoms at baseline on post-treatment relational health. So if you had more infant mental health home visiting, you actually had improved relational health, but also it also was the case that if you were in the intervention group, the association that existed between PTSD and relational health was eradicated through participation in the service. And not only relational health, which kind of makes sense intuitively, but also what we found is that receipt of infant mental health home visiting mitigated the association between mother's ACEs and toddler language development. I get really excited about this as a developmentalist because we know that early language development is actually a precursor for so many things: emotional health, relational health, social functioning, school readiness. And what we're seeing is that at baseline, moms who had high ACEs had kids who had less sort of developed language capacity. And as they participated in the intervention, what we found is that association between ACEs and toddler language development was fully eradicated as well, so fully mitigated, which is pretty exciting. So hopefully we have convinced all of you today that early relationships are a vital sign, that parenting reflectivity is a key mechanism, that relationship-focused interventions can help create that protective buffer through strengthening parenting reflectivity in particular, that we have to do all of this work while attending to the soil and staying focused on equity and social justice, and ultimately that we all share in responsibility towards helping build strong roots and connection, and helping children, parents, families, and communities grow and thrive. And I will just sort of says it at the bottom here, but the videos that we shared with you are the video of the tree, but also a video about the Wondering Response Wheel are freely available to you on our website. If you go to the Strong Roots page and scroll down, feel free to use those, use them with families. We find the tree metaphor works for young kids, but it also works for all of us. We all need strong roots in order to branch out and grow and thrive. So I hope you found some piece of this relevant to your work, and I will stop here.
So let me just say, wow, I have to say, wow, the two of you, so much information, and thank you so much for being here. I know, Dr. Muzik, you've been answering the questions in the chat, and I greatly appreciate it. If folks have other comments they'd like to share, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A. We just have a few minutes to do that. I'll start us off because I'm so curious as a former participant in the Fraternity of Fathers. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you adapted that dad power idea and made that specific to kind of the culture that you found there? And because I think that's an interesting story too.
Thank you. Yes. Well, as you know, we first wanted to use a similar modality for the dads groups. And then, the dads kind of gave us feedback. As I was saying, every adaptation is built on the basis of, feedback from the community, from the participants, and they kind of rate, how do we like it or not. And basically the dads said, this is boring. We don't want to sit around the table and just talk and watch videos and, and kind of reflect. We want to be more kind of moving around, and so with that, we actually paired with someone from the School of Social Work who does adventure therapy modality, outdoors therapy, and we then integrated this adventure therapy like therapeutic modality to present those strong roots concepts and relate it to parenting and child development. So it's still the same strong roots concepts with the tree and the wandering and response wheel and other concepts, but the way how it's talked about is first we do an activity where we play a game. And Jeff, you were there. The games might be some, kind of challenging games where you have to, as a group, let's say without words, you have to go on a quest together and solve a puzzle, something like you have to turn a tarp around while you're standing on it, and you can't use words, and now you have to kind of gesture to each other how to do it. And the guys kind of, noticed as they are doing it that certain emotions are coming up, and that certain strategies come to the forefront, and their communication with the others afterwards is coming up. And we then reflect on the activity and say, what did it bring up to you? Is that how you usually solve issues? Or how do you communicate? Is that reminding you of something? And as they are then discussing this and learning about themselves, we relate it to parenting and, communication with your parent partner. And then also, how do you want, so it's really tying it from learning about yourself, bringing it out through a game or through certain activities, and then relating it to parenting.
Beautiful, beautiful. I want to share some comments really around, first, John Allen says, I think like I've been texting people as you've been talking about how powerful the tree metaphor really is, and how much it really affects us, and that we can all consider it. And I just want to read a lengthy comment here from Dr. Gerber, our CEO, president, who's been sitting and listening. And here's what Andrew says. He says, I want to thank Drs. Muzik and Rosenblum for a tour de force lecture and a really inspiring account of their work and of state-of-the-art interventions with young children and their parents. I could not imagine a lecture or approach that is more relevant to the work we do at Silver Hill. It is not a coincidence that many of us in clinical and leadership roles at Silver Hill were trained as child clinicians. As you said, we were all once children, so I would like to think that every clinician should be better trained in the approaches you describe. I think the nature metaphors you use apply beautifully to what we are trying to accomplish in our continuum of care in the treatment of complex patients and the way we care for each other, creating a nurturing and inclusive environment where patients get the care they need on the road to better understanding of themselves and better acceptance by their families. Will you comment on whether this approach has been applied to inpatient and residential settings?
So I'm happy to talk about residential, but yes, we have. We are not using it in an inpatient psychiatry setting. And mostly also because at Michigan Medicine is like a 3-day or 5-day admission. So really, unfortunately, we are not providing long-term, therapeutic approaches in our inpatient settings. We have used these concepts in a mother-baby unit. We have a mother-baby program. It's a partial hospital program in Grand Rapids, and so they use the programs. Colleagues have also used it in their mother-baby programs, like Helen Kim in Minneapolis, but also in residential programs with substance using moms. We have colleagues who have taken it up, and then currently in a Ohio state prison, right, where moms are admitted with their children and have a nursery, and so they use it there too. So I think residential programs where you have individuals there, parents there for a length of time is actually ideal. We're currently piloting it with with women in recovery postpartum, but they are outpatient, and it's challenging. It's more challenging outpatient. Residential is definitely easier.
I will just add that we are also working, so the perinatal DBT and Mom Power curricula, we are adapting to an individual treatment. So stay tuned. We're going to have an individual psychotherapy version of this. I think, the sort of power of groups is really, it can't be sort of overstated, but I think the concepts really do apply across the lifespan. And so anecdotally, we know people are using these videos and these concepts in lots of different settings. And we encourage you all to feel free to use the videos and use what we've shared. If you want to learn more, you can go to our website, but we see application in lots of different settings as possible, and hope you'll help us learn about that.
Thank you. I know Dr. Muzik is typing furiously before we end here in a minute to answer some of these texts. Is it okay if, because we're out of time, if folks out there send you an email with any kind of questions they have about the program?
Yeah,
There's
I can see
about
Without a
cost.
doubt. And
Great.
in fact, on the PDF, our address is on the PDFs that will be available to you. So feel free to email us with questions. We'd love to hear from you or thoughts, things that you can help us learn as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And so we are coming to the end of our Grand Rounds program today. Again, thank you both for joining us. As you can see in the Q&A, there's so many thank yous, and wow is right. And thank you for bringing John Bowlby back to life, really here for us all to enjoy, to think about, to apply to our own lives, our own hearts and souls and minds. Thank you both. Thank you all for your participation today, and hope to see you at our next Grand Rounds. We also have a first Project Echo program that's focusing, starting with the still face ideas and mentalizing, which is a case-based learning program that will start April 5th. And you can find the details of that, everybody, on our website as well under upcoming events. So thank you all. The link for the CME and CEU will appear. And as I always say, the ending is a little abrupt since we've been together. So thank you both so much for being here, and great to see you.
It was an honor. Thank you. Take care,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.